mountain ridgeline stretched endlessly into the Afghan darkness, its jagged peaks cutting harsh silhouettes against a star-drunk sky. Staff Sergeant Marcus "Ghost" Rodriguez pressed his body deeper into the rocky outcropping, feeling the sharp edges of granite bite through his tactical vest. The night vision goggles cast everything in an eerie green glow, transforming the landscape into something alien and unforgiving. Beside him, his spotter Jenkins breathed in measured intervals, each exhale a tiny puff of vapor that dissipated instantly in the thin mountain air. They had been in position for 14 hours now, watching the compound below through their scopes. The intelligence had been solid. Too solid, Rodriguez thought with growing unease. High-value target, minimal security, perfect opportunity. In his 8 years with DevGru, Rodriguez had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The compound sat nestled in a valley like a spider in its web, surrounded by terraced fields that had been abandoned for months. No movement, no guards rotating their positions, no signs of the usual paranoia that kept these targets alive. "Ghost, this is Overwatch," Jenkins whispered through the comm, his voice barely audible even at close range. "I've got thermal signatures moving through the eastern approach. Count 6. No, 8 tangos." Rodriguez adjusted his scope, scanning the thermal imaging overlay. The heat signatures moved with purpose, not the casual patrol patterns they'd observed earlier. These were reinforcements, and they were arriving right on schedule. A schedule nobody had shared with the SEAL team. The realization hit him like ice water. They weren't the hunters tonight. They were the hunted. This wasn't a raid, it was an ambush, and they'd walked right into it. Rodriguez's mind raced through contingencies, escape routes, extraction protocols. The nearest safe zone was 12. Clicks through hostile territory and their backup extraction point had been compromised the moment those reinforcements arrived. The radio crackled with static as he tried to reach base, but the mountains swallowed his transmissions like hungry. "Ghosts, Jenkins, we need to move, now." Rodriguez began packing his rifle with practiced efficiency, muscle memory taking over even as his mind processed the tactical nightmare unfolding around them. That's when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this desolate mountain wilderness. It was subtle at first, a low rumble that could have been thunder if not for the clear sky above. Jenkins froze, cocking his head to listen. "You hear that?" Jenkins asked, though they both knew the answer. The sound was growing stronger, more distinct. It was the deep, throaty growl of twin General Electric TF-34 turbofan engines, and it was coming fast and low. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. The A-10 Thunderbolt II wasn't supposed to be in this area. Their mission brief had specifically stated no close air support was available due to the sensitive nature of their target and the proximity to civilian areas. The Warthog appeared like a mechanical angel of death, its distinctive silhouette unmistakable even in the darkness. It came in so low that Rodriguez could see the pilot's helmet in the cockpit, could make out the shark teeth painted on the nose cone that gave the aircraft its fearsome appearance. The A-10 banked hard to the left, its massive GAU-8 cannon pointing directly at the compound below like an accusing finger. There had been no radio chatter, no coordination calls, no requests for target confirmation. Whoever was flying that bird was operating completely off the grid. Rodriguez watched through his scope as the compound suddenly erupted into chaos. Figures emerged from buildings that had appeared empty moments before, automatic weapons fire strobing in the darkness like deadly fireflies. The thermal signatures Jenkins had spotted were now sprinting toward defensive positions, their carefully laid ambush falling apart as they realized they were no longer the predators in this deadly game. The A-10 rolled into its attack run with lethal grace, and Rodriguez could swear he heard the pilot humming over the radio frequency, a low, melodic tune that seemed impossibly calm given the violence about to unfold. It was then that something clicked in his memory. That voice, that particular cadence. He'd heard it before, years ago, in a different war zone under very different circumstances. But it couldn't be her. Captain Sarah Reaper Mitchell had been declared killed in action over Syria 3 years ago. Her A-10 lost to enemy fire with no chance of survival. Yet, as the Warthog lined up for its first pass, Rodriguez found himself whispering a name he thought he'd never say again. The same name that had gotten him through his darkest moments in Fallujah. The same person who had pulled his unit out of an impossible situation when air support was nothing but a distant dream. If it really was her down there in that cockpit, then this night had just taken a turn that would change everything he thought he knew about loss, loyalty, and the ghosts that haunt every warrior's dreams. The first burst from the GAU-8 lit up the valley like the wrath of gods, and Rodriguez knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. The 30mm depleted uranium rounds tore through the compound's main building like paper, each shell the size of a milk bottle delivering devastating kinetic energy. Rodriguez watched through his scope as the structure simply disintegrated, concrete and steel vaporizing under the relentless assault. The sound was unlike anything else in warfare, a mechanical roar that seemed to tear the very fabric of reality, followed by the thunderous impacts that shook the mountain beneath them. But it wasn't the destruction that made Rodriguez's blood run cold. It was the precision. Every burst, every pass was surgical in its accuracy, targeting only the armed combatants while leaving potential civilian structures untouched. This wasn't the work of a pilot following standard close air support protocols. This was personal, intimate knowledge of the battlefield that could only come from someone who had been watching for far longer than the few minutes since the A-10's arrival. "Ghost, how the hell did Command know we were compromised?" Jenkins hissed through the comm, his voice tight with adrenaline. "And why didn't they tell us about the air support?" Rodriguez couldn't answer because he was beginning to suspect that Command didn't know anything about what was happening down there. The A-10 banked hard right, exposing its underside, and in the brief moment when the aircraft passed directly overhead, Rodriguez caught a glimpse of something that made his heart stop. The tail number had been painted over, but not completely. Beneath the hasty black paint job, he could make out the faint outline of digits he'd memorized years ago. 810965. "Reaper 6, he whispered, the call sign falling from his lips like a prayer. It was her bird, the same A-10 that had supposedly gone down in flames over the Syrian desert, taking with it the only pilot who'd ever made him believe in miracles. Sarah Mitchell had been more than just close air support to Rodriguez's squad during those hellish months in Iraq. She'd been their guardian angel, their ace in the hole, the voice on the radio that could turn a nightmare into victory with nothing more than a few well-placed rounds from her Gatling gun. More than that, she'd been his anchor during the darkest period of his military career, when the weight of command and the constant specter of death had nearly broken him completely. The memories flooded back with crushing intensity. Late nights in the forward operating base, sharing MREs and stories about home. Her laugh, bright and fierce even in the middle of a war zone. The way she'd look at him across the briefing room. Those steel-gray eyes holding promises of a future neither of them dared to voice. And then Syria, that cursed mission that was supposed to be routine reconnaissance. The radio calls that went unanswered. The satellite footage showing her A-10 spinning toward the Earth in a ball of flame. He'd attended her memorial service, had folded her flag with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, had carried her dog tags alongside his own ever since. The grief had nearly destroyed him, would have if not for the promise he'd made at her graveside, to honor her memory by being the kind of soldier she'd believed him capable of becoming. Now, as he watched that impossible aircraft rain death on their enemies, Rodriguez felt the carefully constructed walls of his emotional fortress crumbling. The A-10 completed another pass, this time so close that he could see the pilot's hands on the controls. Steady, confident, exactly the way Sarah had always flown. But it couldn't be her. People didn't come back from the dead, not even pilots with reflexes like lightning and hearts brave enough to fly into hell itself. Yet, as the aircraft pulled up from its latest strafing run, the radio crackled to life with a transmission that made Rodriguez's entire world shift on its axis. "Lonely boy, this is your guardian angel. Sorry I'm late to the party." The voice was older, weathered by years of pain and survival, but unmistakably familiar. It was a voice he'd heard in dreams and nightmares, a voice that had whispered his call sign, "Lonely boy," in moments of tenderness he'd never allowed himself to fully remember. Sarah had given him that nickname during their 3rd week together, teasing him about the melancholy way he stared at the horizon during briefings. "Reaper?" Rodriguez keyed his radio, his voice breaking like a teenager's. "Reaper 6? Is that really you?" The silence stretched for an eternity, punctuated only by the distant echo of the A-10's engines as it circled the valley like a predatory hawk. When the response came, it carried 3 years of anguish, survival, and desperate hope. "Hello, Marcus. We need to talk, but first, let's get you and your boy out of this valley. I count 12 more tangos moving up the western slope, and they've got RPGs. Time to go." Rodriguez's training kicked in even as his emotional world exploded around him. Sarah was alive, flying an aircraft that should have been scrap metal, appearing at exactly the moment when death seemed inevitable. The tactical situation was still desperate, but somehow the impossible had become possible. "Copy that, Reaper. What's the extraction plan?" Even as he spoke, Rodriguez was already moving, Jenkins falling in beside him with the fluid precision of a partnership forged in countless firefights. The A-10 rolled into another attack run, its cannon spitting flame and death at targets Rodriguez couldn't even see from his position. "There's a clearing 2 clicks northeast of your position. I've got friends waiting there, but you need to move now. The whole mountain's about to wake up, and I can't keep them off you forever." Friends. Rodriguez filed that information away, for later questioning, focusing instead on the immediate tactical problem of getting off this mountain alive. As they began their desperate sprint through the darkness, Rodriguez found himself running toward answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear, following the sound of engines that carried the ghost of a woman he'd never stopped loving. The terrain was treacherous even with night vision, loose shale and hidden crevices threatening to end their escape before it truly began. Rodriguez's lungs burned in the thin mountain air as he pushed himself harder than he had in years, Jenkins matching his pace step for step. Behind them, the compound continued to burn, Sarah's methodical destruction of their ambushers buying them precious minutes. But Rodriguez could hear other sounds now. Vehicles starting up in the distance, radio chatter in Pashto and Arabic, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortars that forced them to dive for cover behind a boulder outcropping. "Reaper, we're taking indirect fire," Rodriguez gasped into his radio as dirt and rock fragments rained down around them. The A-10's response was immediate, a diving attack that silenced the mortar position with surgical precision. Rodriguez had seen close air support before, but never anything like this. Sarah wasn't just providing cover. She was anticipating threats before they fully materialized, as if she could see the entire battlefield from some impossible vantage point. "Marcus, there's something you need to know before we reach the extraction point." Sarah's voice crackled through the static, and Rodriguez could hear something in her tone that made his blood run cold. It was the same voice she'd used that last night before the Syria mission, when she'd tried to tell him something important, but he'd been too focused on the tactical briefing to listen. "The people who are waiting for us, they're not exactly military." Jenkins shot Rodriguez a questioning look, but there was no time for explanations. They crested a ridge and saw the clearing spread out below them, a natural landing zone carved into the mountainside by some ancient geological event. What Rodriguez saw there defied every assumption he'd made about their situation. 3 vehicles were positioned in a defensive perimeter, not military Humvees or civilian trucks, but custom-modified technical vehicles that looked like they'd been cobbled together from salvaged parts and battlefield ingenuity. The people manning those vehicles were even more surprising. Rodriguez counted at least 8 figures, all heavily armed but wearing a mixture of military gear from different nations and time periods. American tactical vests, Russian optics, German weapons, British communications equipment. It was like someone had raided an international arms dealer's warehouse. Through his scope, Rodriguez could make out faces that told stories of hard living and harder choices. These weren't soldiers, at least not anymore. Ghost? Who the hell are these people? Jenkins whispered, his rifle trained on the clearing below. Rodriguez was wondering the same thing. But as they watched, one of the figures detached from the group and moved with a purposeful stride that triggered another flood of memories. The woman was tall, lean, moving with the confident gait of someone, accustomed to command. Even from this distance, even after 3 years, Rodriguez would have recognized that silhouette anywhere. Sarah Mitchell stepped into a patch of moonlight, and Rodriguez felt his world tilt on its axis for the second time. That night, she was alive, real, standing in that clearing like she'd never been gone. But she was different too. Harder, more weathered, with new scars visible on her exposed arms and a wariness in her posture that spoke of battles fought in shadows and forgotten places. She raised a handheld radio to her lips. "Marcus, I know you're up there. I know you have questions, and I know this looks—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Complicated, but right now, we need to move. That attack back there has stirred up every hostile force within 50 kilometers. We have maybe 10 minutes before this mountain is crawling with people who want us all dead." Rodriguez made a decision that went against every protocol, every regulation, every piece of training he'd absorbed in 15 years of military service. He stood up from his concealment and began walking down the slope toward the clearing. Jenkins hissed a curse behind him, but followed because that's what good soldiers did. They followed their leaders into uncertainty, trusting that experience, and intuition would see them through. As they approached the perimeter, Rodriguez got his first close look at Sarah's companions. They were a mix of nationalities and backgrounds, but they all shared certain characteristics. The 1,000-yard stare of combat veterans, the casual competence with weapons that came from years of use, and, most tellingly, the look of people who had been abandoned by their own governments. Rodriguez recognized the type because he'd seen them in every conflict zone he'd served in. The ghosts, the soldiers who'd fallen through the cracks or been deliberately erased from official records. "Jesus, Sarah," Rodriguez said as he reached the clearing's edge. "What happened to you? What is all this?" She was standing 20 feet away, close enough that he could see the silver scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline. Close enough to notice that she still wore his dog tags alongside her own. The sight of that small piece of metal, that tangible connection to their shared past, nearly brought him to his knees. 3 years ago, that mission over Syria wasn't what they told us it was, Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of revelations that had clearly cost her everything. "I wasn't shot down by enemy fire, Marcus. I was shot down by our own people, by someone who wanted me dead because I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, something that goes all the way to the top of our command structure." The words hit Rodriguez like physical blows. Betrayal, conspiracy, the unthinkable possibility that the very people they'd sworn to serve had orchestrated Sarah's supposed death. "That's impossible," he said. But even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering anomalies from that night. The unusual mission parameters, the restricted communications protocols, the way their debriefing had been conducted by people he'd never seen before. "I survived the crash, barely," Sarah continued, her eyes never leaving his face. "Spent 6 months in a Taliban prison, another year recovering from injuries that should have killed me. When I finally made contact with friendly forces, I discovered that Sarah Mitchell was officially dead, her record sealed, her unit disbanded. The people who tried to kill me had covered their tracks perfectly." Rodriguez felt Jenkins tense beside him, the younger SEAL's hand drifting toward his sidearm. The tactical situation was spiraling beyond anything their training had prepared them for. They were in the middle of hostile territory, surrounded by armed strangers, listening to a story that suggested their own government had tried to murder one of their own. "So I did what any good soldier does when abandoned by their command," Sarah said, gesturing toward her mismatched team of warriors. "I found other people in the same situation, and we started taking care of problems that the official world couldn't or wouldn't handle. We became freelancers, Marcus, off-the-books operators working for anyone who could pay us to do the jobs that don't officially exist." The sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountain walls cut through the night air, still distant but growing closer. Sarah's team immediately began preparing for departure, their movements coordinated with the efficiency of a unit that had worked together under fire. Rodriguez found himself at a crossroads that would define the rest of his life. He could follow protocol, attempt to extract through official channels and probably end up dead or disappeared like Sarah was supposed to have been. Or he could trust the woman who had once been his anchor, the pilot who had saved his life more times than he could count. "Why did you save us tonight?" Rodriguez asked, needing to understand her motivation before making a choice that couldn't be undone. Sarah's smile was sad and fierce at the same time, the expression of someone who had lost everything and found a way to keep fighting anyway. "Because I've been tracking you for 6 months, Marcus. Someone put a kill order out on your entire unit. Someone with enough pull to make you disappear just like they tried to do to me. Tonight was supposed to be your last mission, but it wasn't going to be a terrorist ambush that killed you. It was going to be friendly fire, officially listed as a tragic mistake during a complex operation." The helicopter sounds were growing louder, and Rodriguez could see the navigation lights cutting through the darkness as multiple aircraft converged on their position. Sarah's team was already loading into their vehicles with practiced efficiency, but Rodriguez stood frozen in the center of the clearing, his mind reeling from the implications of her words. Jenkins gripped his shoulder, the younger SEAL's face a mask of disbelief and growing rage. "Sir, we need to move," Jenkins said, but his voice carried an undertone of uncertainty that Rodriguez had never heard before. The foundation of everything they'd believed about their service, their mission, their loyalty, was crumbling beneath their feet. In the distance, muzzle flashes lit up the ridgelines as Sarah's diversionary attacks continued to draw enemy forces away from their position. "Who?" Rodriguez demanded, grabbing Sarah by the shoulders. "Who gave the order? Who's behind this?" Her eyes were hard as flint, but he could see the pain beneath the surface, the cost of 3 years spent living in the shadows of betrayal and survival. "General Morrison," she said, the name falling between them like a physical blow. "Your beloved mentor, the man who personally recommended you for DevGru, who attended your commendation ceremonies, who promised your father he'd watch out for you after that IED took him in Kandahar." Rodriguez felt the world tilt beneath his feet. General Morrison had been more than a commanding officer. He'd been a father figure, a guiding light in Rodriguez's military career. "That's impossible," Rodriguez whispered, but even as he spoke, pieces began falling into place. Morrison's unusual interest in Rodriguez's mission assignments, the classified briefings that seemed to go nowhere, the way certain operations had been compartmentalized beyond normal security protocols. Sarah reached into her tactical vest and pulled out a tablet, its screen showing satellite imagery, communications intercepts, financial records. "Marcus, Morrison's been selling operational intelligence to the highest bidder for over 5 years. You and your team stumbled onto evidence of his network during that raid in Mosul last year. The intelligence you recovered from that compound didn't just disappear into the bureaucracy, it identified Morrison as the source of leaks that got dozens of our people killed." The tablet's screen showed bank transfers, coded communications, meeting schedules that painted a picture of systematic betrayal spanning multiple theaters of operation. Rodriguez stared at the evidence, his hands shaking with a combination of rage and grief. The man who had delivered his father's eulogy, who had pinned medals on his chest, who had been a constant presence throughout his military career, had been orchestrating the deaths of American soldiers for profit. "Sarah," How do you know all this? How did you get access to classified financial records?" Her smile was grim and predatory, the expression of someone who had learned to navigate the darkest corners of the intelligence world. "Because Morrison wasn't the only one involved, Marcus. There's an entire network of corrupt officials, defense contractors, and foreign agents who have been systematically compromising our operations for years. When they tried to kill me, they didn't realize. They were creating their worst nightmare, someone with inside knowledge, combat skills, and absolutely nothing left to lose. The lead helicopter was close enough now that Rodriguez could see the door gunners manning their positions, could hear the distinctive whine of military-grade turbine engines. But these weren't search and rescue birds. They were attack helicopters, armed and dangerous, coming in fast and low with the kind of aggressive posture that meant only one thing. Someone had decided that everyone in this clearing needed to die. "We've got company," shouted one of Sarah's team members, a compact woman with Scandinavian features and a rifle that looked like it had been modified by a master gunsmith. "Multiple inbound, armed and hostile." Sarah's team moved with the fluid coordination of professionals, who had faced overwhelming odds before and survived through skill, preparation, and ruthless efficiency. "Marcus, you have about 30 seconds to make the most important decision of your life," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. "You can try to surrender to those helicopters and hope Morrison's people decide you're not worth the risk of keeping alive, or you can come with us and help expose the network that's been selling out American soldiers for profit." Rodriguez looked at Jenkins, saw his own struggle reflected in the younger man's eyes. They were career military, trained to follow orders and trust the chain of command. Everything they'd been taught said they should attempt to contact their handlers, report their situation, follow proper protocols. But proper protocols had led them into an ambush, and proper protocols had apparently gotten Sarah murdered, except she'd been too stubborn to stay dead. "Sir," Jenkins said quietly, "I've been reviewing our mission parameters for the last 6 months. The target selections, the intelligence sources, the support availability. If what she's saying is true, we've been walking into increasingly dangerous situations with decreasing backup. Someone's been trying to get us killed, and tonight they almost succeeded." The helicopters opened fire without warning, 20mm cannon rounds chewing up the ground around the vehicles. Rodriguez threw himself behind one of the technical trucks as the world exploded into chaos. Sarah's team returned fire with weapons that definitely weren't standard military issue. Armor-piercing rounds that punched through helicopter armor plating, electromagnetic pulse grenades that sent one of the attacking birds spinning out of control, surface-to-air missiles that appeared to have been liberated from various international arms markets. "This is Reaper." Sarah's voice cut through the combat frequency. "All units, execute Protocol 7. We're going dark." Rodriguez watched in amazement as Sarah's A-10 materialized out of the darkness above them, her GAU-8 cannon speaking with the voice of mechanical thunder. The attacking helicopters broke off their assault, their pilots recognizing the futility of engaging an A-10 in a close support role. But as the enemy aircraft retreated, Rodriguez saw something that made his blood freeze. One of the helicopters was peeling off from the main formation, circling wide to come in from the north. Through his scope, he could see the side door sliding open, could see a figure in military fatigues preparing to fast rope down into their position. The figure was wearing general's stars, and even at this distance, Rodriguez recognized the silver hair and commanding posture of the man who had shaped his entire military career. General Morrison had come to finish the job personally. "Sarah!" Rodriguez screamed into his radio. "Morrison's here. He's in the bird coming from the north." The response was immediate. Sarah's A-10 banking hard toward the approaching helicopter, her cannon already spinning up to firing speed. But Morrison's pilot was good, weaving through the mountain peaks with the skill of someone who had flown combat missions in 3 different wars. Rodriguez made his choice in that moment, the decision crystallizing with the clarity that only came in life-or-death situations. He grabbed Jenkins by the vest and sprinted toward Sarah's convoy. "We're with you," he shouted over the sound of engines, and gunfire. Whatever this network is, wherever it leads, we're going to burn it all down. Sarah's voice came through the radio one more time, filled with satisfaction and something that might have been love. Welcome to the dark side, lonely boy. Hope you're ready for a war that doesn't officially exist, because we're about to take on enemies who control the very system we used to serve. The convoy roared to life, its modified engines propelling them into the Afghan night as Sarah's A-10 engaged Morrison's helicopter in a deadly aerial dance above the mountains. Rodriguez found himself in the back of a heavily armored vehicle, surrounded by soldiers who had been erased from official records, following a woman who had risen from the dead to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of military command. As they raced through the darkness toward an uncertain future, Rodriguez realized that everything he had believed about honor, duty, and service was about to be redefined in ways he couldn't have imagined. Behind them, the mountain burned with the fires of betrayal exposed and justice long overdue. Ahead of them lay a shadow war against an enemy that wore the same uniform they had once worn with pride. But for the first time in 3 years, Rodriguez felt something he had thought lost forever. Hope, carried on the wings of an A-10 flown by a ghost who had refused to stay buried.